This week, hacking Blackhat Badges. Yep, we got that. USB Harpoons, and not the ale. PHP attacks, privacy in Las Vegas hotels or not. Who's looking at your DNS requests, AWS breaches, and more. Jason Wood from Paladin Security joins us for expert commentary on social networks getting fined for hosting terrorist content. So stay tuned for this episode of Hack Naked News. This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show that brings you the security news each week. And despite popular belief, we do wear pants. It's Hack Naked News.
The breach was huge news at the time.
Linux monitoring tool.
List of affected devices. You can check out the link in the show notes.
Ars Technica is reporting that hackers have cracked the Nintendo Switch this week.
Tracking people's locations and stuff like that.
You'll want to be rolling out updates if you're using Lenovo hardware. Do you have a website, an external presence, employees, an office? Any of these things can be compromised and attacked. How are you defending your assets? Have you penetration tested your public assets? Start 2018 by taking a proactive approach to securing your vulnerable areas. Black Hills Information Security has been helping companies find their weaknesses since 2008. Email consulting@blackhillsinfosec.com and see how they can help you sleep better at night. Welcome, everyone, to Hack Naked News, episode 185 for August 21st, 2018. I'm your host, Paul Asadorian, coming at you live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island. Just one announcement. Make sure you register for our webcast with Javelin Networks, how to get attackers to contain themselves, all about lateral movement inside of Active Directory, how to accomplish that, and how to prevent against it. Myself and Joff Thayer, along with the talented ninjas at Javelin Networks, will be there on August 30th from 12 p.m. to 1 p.m. Please go to securityweekly.com/Javelin and sign up today. Alrighty, and now on to the stories for this week. How I hacked Blackhat 2018 Ninja.style. Those who've attended Blackhat may have noticed, and this is a quote from the article, may have noticed that their badge contains an NFC tag. This NFC tag is scanned at booths in the business hall so vendors can collect the marketing data, including your name, address, company, job, title, and phone number. And essentially, the researcher read the tag with his phone, then analyzed the Android app that was specifically tailored to read this particular tag, realized after reverse engineering the Android app that all you need to retrieve the user's email address and all information, which is encrypted on the tag, is their badge ID and their event ID values. Those are then sent to an API. That API, turns out, didn't have any authentication on it. So, which means after a little bit of brute forcing and scripting, this researcher was able to pull all of the Blackhat attendee information online. Now, this was responsibly disclosed from everything I could tell, and Blackhat has since closed down the vulnerable and what they call an outdated API so that this attack cannot continue. We, of course, saw something similar to this with RSA as well. This attack is a lot more devastating. However, they did fix it pretty quickly, so hopefully not too many people have everyone's information, which has already been disclosed in breaches anyway. So that was really bad, and a really cool article to read about the process. The USB Harpoon is a bad USB attack with a twist. How about that for a title? So several security experts have built a malicious version of a USB charging cable, one that can compromise a computer in just a few seconds. Once plugged in, it turns itself into a peripheral device or a HID device capable of typing and launching commands. Now, some have tried to put this in a cable and some have failed. Traditionally, attacks have been in USB keys, not the cable itself. It was a significant challenge for researchers to actually build this cable and get to a solution that worked. Kevin Mitnick was actually behind requesting this style of attack for his penetration tests, which makes sense if you're using this in conjunction with social engineering or very covert penetration tests. Giving a user a cable is a very inconspicuous way of then being able to launch commands on their system. They also bridge the pins so the cable both acts as a HID device and functions as a charging cable. So in other words, I just give the person the cable, they charge their phone or whatever they're plugging into the other end of the cable, it charges, and the hid device then launches commands on the computer. There's also speculation in the article and references that USB Type-C USB devices or adapters or ports are also vulnerable to this style of attack. Now, it does put a screen up on the user's computer that shows the commands that are being run. And of course, you know, the computer has to be unlocked according to the article. So there are some limitations, but I thought this was a really stealthy kind of progression in terms of malicious USB devices. An ex-NSA hacker has disclosed the Mac OS X High Sierra zero-day vulnerability. Those of you that have listened to the show, of course, are familiar with Patrick Wardle's research. We've referenced him several times and have done an interview with Patrick as well. I think that with this story, all bets are off when it comes to privilege escalation on Mac OS. Patrick discovered that he uncovered a critical zero-day flaw in Mac OS operating system that could allow a malicious application installed on the targeted system to virtually click objects without any user interaction or consent. Now, this is dangerous, as Patrick explains, because via a single click, countless security mechanisms may be completely bypassed. For instance, if you run an untrusted app, you can click Allow. If you need to authorize keychain access, you could click Allow. You could load third-party kernel extensions and click Allow. And the list goes on by basically virtually clicking. That research was disclosed at summer camp, and he has not disclosed all of the details on his exploit, as I believe a patch is still being formed, hence the 0-day in the title. New PHP code execution attack puts WordPress sites at risk, as if WordPress wasn't at risk enough. Thomas found that there is that an attacker can use low-risk functions against far archives to trigger deserialization attack without requiring the use of unserialized function in a wide range of scenarios. What does this mean, essentially? It means that if I'm authenticated to WordPress, so this is, again, another privilege escalation attack, an author-level user can take over your entire WordPress instance. So, again, this is privilege escalation. Make sure you manage your users accordingly, and there are no vulnerabilities or easily guessable passwords. And, of course, I'm assuming there is a patch that will be coming out for this as well. It was not specific to just WordPress, as the vulnerability was in PHP, and it affected some other products as well. The big news headline about privacy and the recent DEF CON conference stemmed from Caesars Hotel. Just to kind of summarize a snippet from the article to give folks that may have not heard what was happening inside Caesars at the hotel. Of course, heightened security after the shooting at Mandalay Bay. These security measures are being put into question by the security community and really everyone who cares about privacy. So the article states that lots of debate is, on this one, as it appears DEF CON had run right into a policy change by the Caesars property hotel. So Caesars is worried about the prospect of someone stockpiling weapons in their suitcases, as in Mandalay Bay, and thus using their hotels for an anchor for some type of mass shooting. Now, the hotels have decided, and I'm sure the policies are different between the hotels, that if someone has a do not disturb tag on their door for more than a couple of days, which also isn't very specific either, a search has to be made, which means they're going to come into your room, whether you have the do not disturb on it, whether you have that sign on it or not, and inspect the room. There were various reports of what type of inspections were being done. Were they going through bags? Were they going through drawers? And this debate about between privacy and security, I'm assuming will continue for some time, and it'll be interesting to see how this shapes policy and conference decisions moving forward in the security community. How's that encryption on DNS coming? Now, we've all known that we've had DNSSEC for quite some time. However, there was a group of Chinese researchers that it really wasn't about the fact that DNS was in clear text for me. It was the proof they had that ISPs were actually intercepting DNS requests. So even if you set your DNS server to Google, the ISP was intercepting that and looking at what sites you were trying to resolve via DNS. So the researchers then looked for providers spoofing the IP address of user-specified DNS resolvers to intercept the DNS traffic covertly. They designed their study to focus on registered domains and omit sensitive keywords to avoid influence of content censorship mechanisms. They found that the DNS query interception in 259 of the 3,047 service provider AS collections tested, AS is autonomous system, or 8.5%, were actually intercepting DNS traffic. They did put together a website, which I didn't put on there, but if you go to the article in the show notes, at the very bottom, there is a site that you can test it. I cannot validate this site in any way, shape, form, or fashion. However, at the bottom of the article, the researchers put together a site, which unfortunately doesn't have an SSL certificate, which makes me very leery just in that alone, but is whatismydnsresolver.com. Go there at your own risk. Is a site that's supposed to tell you if this is happening by your ISP. Hackers leverage AWS to breach and persist in corporate networks. Now, some of the traditional, simpler attacks against AWS are to steal AWS keys and seek direct paths to resources stored in open S3 buckets, or launch new EC2 or other types of instances. We've also seen this in the container space and container services on Amazon as well. They typically mine cryptocurrency or send distributed denial of service attacks. However, sometimes actually recently, the trend now that I believe ThreatStack is finding is that they're getting more sophisticated and they're embedding themselves inside of AWS. They're connecting to Amazon's RDS services to download data, and they're persisting inside of AWS. The underlying attack techniques are not very different from what we've seen traditionally. However, they're applying that to the 147 different services that Amazon AWS has to offer. So the article contains some more examples about specific vulnerabilities, and I think it's an interesting area to watch for as you make your cloud deployments. I think that configuration and monitoring of your cloud deployments is a must-have today, as I don't think we've seen these attacks as often as we could have in the past. As adoption increases, now attackers are looking to the cloud as more people have adopted cloud. I think it's a natural progression. I feel like we're a little behind in the protections. And the last one, there was an OpenSSH user enumeration flaw that came out. It still baffles me that today we're actually still finding bugs in OpenSSH code. That's the stories, news, security news for this week. We're going to take a short break and come back with Jason Wood from Paladin Security. Today's determined attackers easily bypass even the most advanced network defenses. Trying to ramp up staff to detect their backdoors can cost thousands of dollars and take months, even years. With Active Countermeasures AI Hunter, we enable junior analysts to detect even the most advanced backdoors in a matter of hours. Sign up for a demo and purchase our product today by visiting activecountermeasures.com/HNN. Active Countermeasures. Make every analyst a hunter. Welcome back, everyone, to Hack Naked News. Mr. Jason Wood is here with us. Jason, welcome to the show.
Hey, Paul. How are you doing today?
Doing fantastic. Fantastic.
Excellent.
What's going on in the expert commentary? That sounds weird to say. I'm sleep
So
deprived.
this week, I spotted an article about some legislation coming out of the European Union that I thought was interesting. I know we've covered legislation in the past around U.S. Laws, but this week we're heading overseas. So basically, the title of this article that I found on the Sophos Naked Security blog is "Social Networks to be Fined for Hosting Terrorist Content." Basically, if proposed legislation coming out of the European Union is passed, social networks may have 1 hour to remove content after it's been flagged as related to terrorism or some other kind of illegal content. Otherwise, they'll face stiff fines for leaving that up past that hour. Basically, the European Commission has decided that social networks aren't doing enough to prevent this type of content, or extremist content, as it was labeled, from being hosted on the internet. The details of the law are still unreleased at this point, though there appears to be some consensus about what the law will look like. In particular, the hour limitation from the time that content is flagged as inappropriate, needs to be taken down to actually being taken down, is something that was proposed back in March, and it now is looking like it's going to make it into the law. Essentially, law enforcement agencies will be able to mark content on social platforms as illegal, and that starts the clock ticking on the takedown. Content that be considered illegal under this law.
So hold on, Jason. I just want to go back to that point because I have a question. So
sure.
It sounds like the point at which it's flagged as terrorist content, that is coming from an external source. So like a law enforcement entity has pointed out that there's terrorist content and reported it to the provider, not the provider has a filter for terrorist content and they've flagged it, right? This sounds like it's an external reporting mechanism.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, this is an external, the way the law is written is law enforcement makes the report, that starts the clock ticking. This is coming from the outside. One of the first questions I had when I saw this was like, all right, who can flag this? Can it just be anybody decides, I don't like this, this must be terrorism or something like that? And it looks like, at least at this point, it needs to be coming from an official organization like law enforcement, which then raises the question of which law enforcement is going to be sitting here trolling around YouTube. Go be a cop and watch YouTube all day. I don't know.
It reminds me of the like RIAA and MPAA takedown notices that we used to get at the university when there was rampant piracy in the days of, well, Napster was like popular as I was like going into the workforce at the university, right? Yep. It was after Napster, but that was big. So we had to process all of these takedown notices, and I don't know. I mean, this could go either way. I think it could be positive that if the social networks develop ways to flag that content themselves and take it down without having to process like a law enforcement request, that might be cheaper and easier for the provider, and it may actually help to keep that content out of social networks, right? Or they may say, well, so let them report it, and then we'll just have a process and take it down, and maybe that's easier. Who knows?
Yeah, so that's interesting you bring up those points, because that's something that the social networks have already started working on. In fact, I'm going to bounce around a little bit here for my write-up, but to respond to that. But YouTube, for example, has started releasing a quarterly report on things that they have done to take down content that is inappropriate or is terrorist related or whatnot. Some numbers here that they reported for their October to December 2017 report. YouTube removed 8,284,039 videos. Of those, 6.7 million were first flagged for review by machines, which is an AI platform that they've created to look for this stuff. And 76% of those videos flagged by the machine driven systems were removed before they even received a single view. So the social platforms are definitely responding to this. They're trying to do this, but it appears that the EC, the European Commission, has decided that those efforts are not sufficient. They need to push harder with law as well. And so, yeah, I mean, it is interesting to see, what the content providers are trying to do to avoid having to have this law put in place and respond to, have some mechanism built essentially now to watch for these flags and process as well.
Jason, did they state how and I'm sure that's in the details, right? But I think it's important to point out that how the social networks validate the request, because if someone's able to spoof a request, they could take down anyone's video channel.
Yeah, and that's something that's not clear at this point. What is that mechanism to validate that this person is legitimate? I mean, I was kind of joking around at home about, if you're going to fine for this sort of thing, if I do some kind of bounty here, do I get a commission if I report stuff that sort of thing? But, like I said, at this point, all the details are really vague because the law hasn't been released. This is just kind of what representatives from the EC are essentially leaking out to the press. Some of the content that they're looking at, they're talking about illegal content, and they're positioning all this around terrorism, right? But the content includes hate speech, material inciting violence, child sex abuse, counterfeit products. I'm on board all the, through all of this, and then whatever they term to be copyright infringement. So we're back to the RIAA and MPAA type of enforcement. It comes out of this terrorism-related bill, but while we're here doing this, let's go ahead and go after the latest episode of South Park or something like that that's been posted up online. What else they talk about here? What are some of the potential size of these fines? Was one of the questions I had. And, at this point, we don't know, but the article points back to an existing German law that requires that, in quotes, obviously illegal content be taken down in 24 hours, or the platform faces a $50 million fine.
Good Lord.
So, what is obviously illegal if you are working for a US-based company reviewing stuff, right? What perspective are you looking at this in? Obviously, this changes from country to country. So, it's really an interesting collision here, I think, between the law, with laws and from different regions and countries, regions of the world and countries. The internet by its nature is an entity that's going to cross boundaries and jurisdictions. You can't be, obviously, it's becoming a situation where you can't be a strictly UK or German or US based company if your service is published out to the internet, because that's going to immediately cross borders.
Yeah, I think your question is like whose laws, right? Because every country has a different set of laws in deeming what's illegal or not.
Yeah, really complicated if you're a country or a company rather that gets caught up in this. Now all of a sudden you need to be enforcing and watching and up to date and experts on laws for who knows how many countries. It's really a pretty rough situation, I think, to be in. I mean, we joke around, have commented on it here in the United States with breach disclosure laws and how it was complicated to apply to federal law and the laws of 50 different states. We're just increasing this now by going around the world. And Europe is obviously putting some teeth into it with some fines. So yeah, it's an interesting article to read. Bounced around a little bit on it. If you have a company or work for an organization that's doing this type of thing, you might want to pay attention because obviously they're targeting the big platforms like YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and things like that. But you could be caught up in this. And if you're not prepared to get down content within an hour, and have some kind of notification or however this works, you could be looking at some gnarly fines. So definitely something to research on and keep an eye on. Like I said, this is proposed legislation, hasn't been released yet. But it sounds like it's coming fairly soon.
Awesome. Jason, thank you so much for the expert commentary this week. Thank you, everyone, for listening and watching. See you next time.